In a biological sense, we need to recharge. We need to eat, drink, and sleep to replenish every day. So too do things like exercise, spending time with loved ones, picking up a hobby or two make us healthier and happier. Pretty basic stuff, right? And yet, despite knowing how important self-care is, it can feel frustratingly elusive. Let's have a conversation about that.
We turn our focus, our intent, towards self-care. Last video, we considered the personal journey. After all, when it comes to engaging with equity, we each have our own path to take. How we work towards better outcomes for people we serve will vary for each of us. The personal journey represents several aspects of the work in that it's internal, external, ongoing, and is rightfully difficult. The personal journey is a way for us to frame our thinking, to help us see the path we want to take even if it's obscured, even if we have to take a roundabout way, or even step back before moving forward. It is through self-care that we stay on the path, that we enable ourselves to take each step in earnest. Before we go straight into our topic, I want to provide a disclaimer. This particular video does not come from the perspective of a mental health professional. In other words, I am not a social worker, therapist, psychologist, one of any number of more qualified professions to weigh in on mental health. Therefore, we're going to take a different approach and perspective, one that is more from the lens of an administrator with some experience in the ups and downs of advocating for equity. This I feel qualified to talk about. As with any of our topics, we're seeking to clarify, summarize, and as always, encourage everyone to find additional resources for those topics you want to delve deeper into. As for what we will cover, first, we'll connect self-care to equity work, discuss why it is so important for us to consider self-care as crucial to what we do. We'll then go into its strategic significance, taking a broad picture to how it allows us to achieve our goals. Finally, we'll get into some tactics, in other words, some considerations in coming up with our own self-care plan. Why the emphasis on self-care? Isn't this something everyone should be doing anyways? Sure, it certainly is. I want to provide some more specific reasons and how it connects to promoting equity. For one, dealing with equity is to come face to face with parts of our society that are appalling, unjust, heartbreaking, whether in big or small ways, whether in circumstances that are annoying or tragic, we're looking at how things are unfair, how some people get the short end of the stick, and the consequences are real. These issues challenge our sense of self. They really do. When we start to suss out any number of inequities, we naturally start to place ourselves in the situation. Have we been getting unintended privileges we weren't aware of? Are we coming to terms with how things have been harder for us than others through no fault of our own? Has our work been part of the problem? That's all heavy. The problems we're aiming to solve are complex, are deeply rooted, and it is very, very frustrating to stand up and say, let's do a better job for some of our least served residents, only to face silence, resistance, to be given the runaround. All these reasons and more are why we should engage with self-care. I'll provide one personal example. I participated in a tow hearing. Essentially, when someone has their vehicle towed, on their notice slip they do have the option to challenge said towing to get their vehicle or vehicles back without paying a fee. This was an administrative hearing, and my role was to determine if code enforcement had followed proper procedures or not. Simple enough. It was a heartbreaking situation. The resident who had their vehicles towed was clearly someone who had a really rough go of late, and I was part of the process that told them, sorry, all of the protocols I can weigh in on were followed. You have to pay the fine or you lose your cars. And when I followed the trail to see if we could change the policy for the next time it happened, I may as well have been speaking Martian. The very thought of changing long-standing policy concerning parked cars was met with incredulousness. It was a bad situation, and I was part of it, and that time I couldn't change anything. It is through self-care that we live, we learn, we try again. There is a strategic element to self-care. It is why it is brought up so often by professionals and others taking action. It takes more effort to change a system than it is to let it remain the same. Effort is another theme for later on. Suffice to say for now, it can be a lot of work. Endurance, willpower, tenacity, these are qualities that help us find success. That if we put in the extra effort, if we're more resilient, we have a better chance. Said endurance, willpower, tenacity, and more isn't necessarily having strength of character or some sort of innate heroism. I mean, it can be, but they can also be gained through conscious, deliberate actions that any of us can take. That action, it's self-care. As we think about self-care, there are hobbies, activities, people, places that take our energy, leave us feeling tired and spent, and those that replenish us, revitalize us, help us bounce back the next day. Both are perfectly good. For our purposes, think hard on what helps us feel empowered and refreshed. Reading a book, a certain kind of exercise, talking with friends, whatever it is. I'll be using miniature painting as my example. Each form of self-care has a cost. The cost may be time, it may be money, it may be something else. For me, I need a certain level of focus to paint. If I'm dragging or am feeling exhausted, painting costs too much attentiveness than I can pay. This is why we need a diversity of options, so we can have more than one self-care method to choose from. If I'm too tired to paint, maybe I can just stretch or take a short walk, or something else that doesn't require me to pay too much attention. We have to be open to reassess. Our interests wax and wane. Sometimes I can paint more miniatures than there are days in the month. Other times not a single one. And that's all right. Sometimes our self-care method works like a charm. In my case, the miniature turning out better than I thought, and I had a fun time along the way. Other times it turns out frustrating. Not happy with my color choices, I can try again later. One more tactic is self-love. I can't paint miniatures unless I treat myself with the figures, the paints, the brushes. Actually allow myself to give the time to try. Self-care is a choice. Some days are hard. Some days we just don't have the time, the energy, the mindset to hold a nice conversation, or to jog, or to drink a warm mug of tea. That's okay. We do have the power to carve out the time to make it a priority on enough days, if that is what we choose to do. We owe it to our communities. If we want to do our best for those we serve, we need to recharge to be able to help out consistently. We owe it to our loved ones to be as good as we can as much as we can. Not perfect, nobody is, but to be as good as we can. And we owe this to ourselves. I mean, hey, if you're watching a video on self-care in the context of promoting equity, I think that's worth something. I hope you think it's worth something too. For many of us, self-love is radical, is its own rebellion if society tells us we shouldn't. We've already hit on half of the optional exercise in the book to think of what energizes us. Now it's just a matter of the second half, to go ahead and make it happen. Up next, learning and unlearning.